Now, on Inside California Politics.
This is what is bothering people. It is a race between Gavin Newsom and Larry Elder, not Gavin Newsom and Donald Trump, not Larry Elder against Democrats, Larry Elder against this particular Democrat named Gavin Newsom.
Governor Newsom's latest challenger is conservative talk show host Larry Elder. His plan to convince voters to recall the governor and then defeat his fellow candidates. And the state budget is finally approved and signed.
This budget is a spectacular budget, once-in-a-lifetime budget.
What's included in the massive $262 billion plan?
Broadcasting across the Golden State, this is Inside California Politics.
Thanks for joining us for Inside California Politics. I'm Nikki Lorenzo in Sacramento. Frank Buckley is off this week. Well, it has been a busy week in state politics with some bad news for Governor Newsom. A judge ruled that Newsom's political affiliation will not be next to his name on the recall ballot. Also this week, the field of candidates running in the recall race is changing. Former adult film star Mary Carey has dropped out of the race, claiming that she did not have enough time to get her affairs in order. And two notable additions: former state legislator and Republican Ted Gaines has now entered the race, as well as talk show host Larry Elder. Larry Elder joins us now with the latest on his campaign to take Governor Newsom's job. Larry, you announced that you were entering the recall election this past week. On your website, the very first line under your vision says that you are in it to win it. We know you're in it. How are you going to win it?
Well, that's the $64,000 question. 2.2 million people signed the petition to recall this guy, and a whole bunch of them were Democrats, a whole bunch of them were independents who voted for him, who've now changed their mind. I think I, Larry Elder, have the ability to articulate the issues in a clear and convincing way, unlike many of the others have, because I've been doing it for 30 years. I'm on in every major market in California, from Sacramento down to San Diego, so people know what I stand for. And I think I can explain the connection between rising crime, the connection between rising homelessness, the connection between the rising cost of living, and the connection between the declining school standards to the left-wing policies by the politicians in Sacramento that have dominated the state for decades, and by this particular Democrat who's been running the state for the last 2 years.
How are you going to convince voters to recall this governor? Because, of course, how the process works, there's two questions on the ballot. Should Gavin Newsom be recalled? Then we get to question two, where people like you and the other candidates in this field come into play. I mean, what's your selling point?
My selling point is rising crime has no ideology. It has no philosophy. Bad schools has no ideology, no philosophy. Homelessness has no ideology, no philosophy. If you're happy with the rising crime, if you're happy with the homelessness, if you're happy with the draconian way this guy shut down this government because of coronavirus in a more severe way than any other 50 states, then you want to keep the guy in. But I believe a whole bunch of people are ticked off about this, and they just don't understand the connection between why they're unhappy and what Gavin Newsom and the Democrats have done for the last several decades. I think I can make that case.
The Newsom campaign and other Democrats in this state have said the folks behind this recall are just a bunch of Trump Republicans who can't win in a regular election, so they're going to try, to get through and win an election through the recall process. What say you to that? Are you a Trump Republican?
Well, they would say that, wouldn't they? That would be the argument that I would make too if I can't explain why crime has gone up. If I can't explain why it's okay for somebody to steal $950 or less every single day without any real consequences, I would say that if I had to explain why 75% of black kids cannot read at state levels of proficiency, nearly 50% of all kids in California cannot. I would say, oh, look over there, look over there. There's Trump, there's Trump, there's Trump. It reminds me of the O.J. Simpson case. There's blood here, there's fiber here. Oh, Mark Furman. Where there's cuts on OJ's hand. There's a long-standing history of him battering Nicole. Well, Mark Furman. That's what these guys are doing. Look, I am a Republican. Of course I supported Trump in 2024, just as I'll support the standard bearer in 2020, just as I'll support the standard bearer in 2024. The last Democrat I voted for was Jimmy Carter back in 1976, and I regret that. I was mad that Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon in my naivete, and I regret that. So
there are more Democrats in this state than there are Republicans. I mean, you're outnumbered. It's a simple math problem. So this is really going to be about turnout. I mean, there are a swath of voters that voted for Trump like yourself in the last election, but not enough of you.
Well, again, 2.2 million people signed this petition to have him recalled. A lot of them were Democrats. A lot of them were independents that have rethought why they want this guy in. And again, once I make the argument, once I explain to people why how and why he ignored science, it wasn't just that he was at that French Laundry having a very expensive restaurant meal. By the way, I'd never heard of the French Laundry until he was there. I didn't realize it was one of the most elite restaurants, not in California, not in America, but in the world. And here he is sitting with the very lobbyists and the very medical professionals that drafted the mandates that they were violating. Meanwhile, his own kid was enjoying in-person private education. He exempted his own winery from the mandates while forcing many businesses into bankruptcy. We still don't even know how much damage there is because the bankruptcy courts are just now reopening. Nearly 2/3 of jobs in other states have come back. Only about 50% of jobs in California have come back. This is what is bothering people. It is a race between Gavin Newsom and Larry Elder, not Gavin Newsom and Donald Trump, not Larry Elder against Democrats, Larry Elder against this particular Democrat named Gavin Newsom. I think I can make that case.
Well, it's not technically Larry Elder against Gavin Newsom. It's going to be Larry Elder against all these other Republicans and a couple of Democrats that have announced. So I want to ask you specifically. Let's take Gavin Newsom. Let's take the governor out of this for a second. What makes you different than former San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulconer? What makes you different or better than a John Cox or Caitlyn Jenner?
Well, I try to subscribe to Ronald Reagan's 11th commandment, thou shalt not speak negatively about fellow Republicans. But I have higher name recognition than any of the people you mentioned other than Caitlyn Jenner. I think some of the people that you mentioned are excellent policy wonks. And when I win, I'm going to invite them to be in my cabinet or on my staff.
What job would you give Caitlyn Jenner?
Not sure yet, but we'll have a conversation about that. But look, if all of us are smart and we turn our cannon fire towards Gavin Newsom, as you pointed out, none of this matters unless he gets recalled. It takes 50% plus one in order for him to be recalled. If that doesn't happen, it doesn't matter how many votes I have. It doesn't matter how many votes the rest of the people have. So we have to stay focused and not chew each other up and make sure that Gavin Newsom leads. If I'm not the person to succeed him, I'll support whoever succeeds him as long as it's not Gavin Newsom.
All right, Larry Elder, wide-ranging conversation. Thanks for your time here on Inside California Politics, and good luck out on the campaign trail.
Nikki, I enjoyed it. ElectElder.com.
Coming up, we go inside the bullpen to discuss the latest developments surrounding the recall race and the newly approved state budget. The budget agreement signed this week by the governor could have a big impact moving forward. This all comes as Governor Newsom tries to stave off the recall challenge. Sophia Bolag with the Sacramento Bee and Alexi Kosif with the San Francisco Chronicle join us now inside the bullpen. Alexi, Sophia, great to talk to you. Another busy week in the world of politics. I want to start, though, with the budget. Historic budget signed this week, Sophia. It happened sort of late Monday night, not a lot of pomp and circumstance, but the governor did take a victory lap in LA.
Yeah, he did. As you noted, that the budget signing came a little later than we typically see for the California budget. The budget year started July 1st, but he didn't sign it until a couple of days ago. And he basically, at the event that you mentioned in Los Angeles, he basically talked about how this is a budget aimed at lifting up Californians, who have struggled during the pandemic. He and other Democratic leaders have described it as transformative. It's a record budget. We've never had a budget this big in California. And a lot of the speakers at the sort of rally event that Newsom did the day after he signed it really framed it as, a reason to keep Newsom in office. He is, of course, facing a recall election in September. And so there were actually, some explicit call outs to the recall and, framing the budget as something that Newsom has done that, voters should continue to support him because he's, according to these people at the rally, doing a good job.
Alexi, let's talk about the recall, because this week another big headline was this lawsuit filed by Team Newsom against Shirley Weber's office, and it all had to do with this sort of filing mistake. Gavin Newsom wasn't going to have Democrat next to his name on the recall ballot on question 1. The judge ruled in favor of the Secretary of State, who said she was just following the law. I mean, in our political circles, this is like, wow, but to voters, do you think this really matters?
I think you can look at it in in two ways. In terms of the vote itself, this may not be a huge deal because, as both sides have pointed out, both Newsom's team and recall organizers have pointed out, pretty much everybody who's paying attention to this race knows that Gavin Newsom is a Democrat. And so if you're really making your decision on a factor like that, it's likely that you already have that information, and it's probably not going to sway a whole lot of voters if that is there or not. But in terms of the optics of it, no, it's not great for the governor. It certainly confirms maybe what a lot of his critics have thought or said about him, that he's, doesn't always quite live up to his promises. He makes a lot of errors, overstates things, and this just sort of feeds into that narrative of him, messing up once again. Even if in this case it's relatively small. So certainly you've seen opponents of his pounce on that and try and just tag him once again as somebody who doesn't quite live up to the governor title.
We had another candidate jump in the recall race. The field of Republicans growing. Larry Elder, Republican conservative radio talk show host. We spoke to him here on Inside California Politics. Of course, he had the same talking points that all the Republicans do: affordability and homelessness and crime. Is he, we don't have an Arnold Schwarzenegger in this race, Alexi. Is he kind of seen as the biggest name right now, since he does have some name ID around the state?
He certainly has some name ID. Caitlyn Jenner arguably has some name ID. But you're right. There's nobody who's as big as Arnold Schwarzenegger was. It's hard to be as big as the biggest movie star in the world. So I think one thing that you're going to see and hear actually a lot from people who are supporting the recall is that it's good to have a lot of these smaller candidates in the race, because maybe having 10 of them will appeal to a lot of different voters and bring them on board and get their support. There might not be that one person who's going to catch lightning in the bottle, but if you start to give voters lots of options, then, maybe they like Larry Elder or John Cox or Kevin Kiley or whoever it is, and those numbers start to add up and push them over the line. Whether that strategy works out remains to be seen, but that's certainly the thinking that I'm hearing from people who are supporting the recall.
Sophia, the big question too, and Alexi touched on this as well, is turnout. We just don't know what turnout is going to look like for the September 14th election.
Yeah, and from Democrats I've talked to and Republican strategists, that's really the, challenge for Newsom, is to motivate his Democratic base to turn out and vote. The polling right now suggests that Newsom is, relatively popular in the state. If, everybody turned out, all, in terms of all voters in California, Democrats vastly outnumber Republicans here in terms of voter registration. But the strategists I've talked to are expecting Republicans, as usual, to overperform in terms of turnout. And the enthusiasm gaps that we're seeing among Democrats, we're seeing that Republicans are much more enthusiastic about voting for the recall. Democrats aren't as engaged. And so it's possible that you could, see very low Democratic turnout. And that really is the biggest risk that Newsom faces. That's, according to the strategists I've talked to, that's really the only way he loses.
Coming up, the new state budget is just over $262 billion. What's included to help California recover from the pandemic? This week, Governor Newsom signed a new California state budget that includes $100 billion in spending and tax relief to help Californians recover from the pandemic. Joining us now is Assembly Speaker Anthony Rendon to help us break it all down. Speaker Rendon, a big week, a historic week for the state of California. And when you say words like state budget, a lot of folks, they kind of their eyes gloss over. It's not the most exciting topic, but this is something that affects everyone's lives in the state of California and their children's lives.
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. I think a lot of people, when you say state budget and you talk about finances, their eyes sort of glaze over and they stop paying attention. But this impacts the lives of every Californian and future generations of Californians. I think if you look at some of the things we're doing in this budget, We're spending about $12 billion over the course of the next 2 years to fight homelessness, to help cities fight homelessness. We're spending $21,000 per school child in the state, K through 12 spending record high, $21,000 per child. All Californians over the age of 50 are going to get full Medi-Cal coverage. There's about $8 billion as well in direct aid to struggling families. So this is a great budget, and it's something we should all be proud of, and it will definitely impact the lives of every Californian.
The timeline in negotiations and how long it kind of took to get this deal done. Of course, supermajorities, Democrats control the Capitol. Why did something like this take so long?
It's a huge budget in excess of $276 billion. There are a lot of different parts to it, a lot of difficult work went into it. Our budget chair, our budget sub chairs engaged in countless budget hearings to kind of make sure that we were spending money wisely. And I think the other thing that's important to remember is that to a large extent, we were trying to figure out what was going to happen with the federal government with respect to stimulus funds to try to figure out exactly how much money we were dealing with.
I want to ask you about some comments from former Governor Jerry Brown. He is known to be frugal. After this budget was announced, he said, quote, in an interview with NBC in LA, he said, the state's spending is not sustainable. Is he right?
Sounds like Jerry Brown is par for the course. I served with him for about 5 years, 3 years in this role and 5 years in the legislature. This budget is fiscally responsible. There are $25 billion in reserves in this state budget. The reserves that we have as a state, just our rainy day fund, that what we have in the bank is in excess of, it's larger than the state budgets of about 33 states. So it's a fiscally responsible budget for sure.
Coming up, how many jobs could the bipartisan infrastructure deal bring to California? Labor Secretary Marty Walsh gives us an inside look at the plan. The bipartisan infrastructure framework is a massive investment of $1.2 trillion. And U.S. Labor Secretary Marty Walsh says the deal is also an investment in our workforce. Inside California Politics contributor Catherine Heenan spoke with Walsh about the specifics.
Thank you for joining us on Inside California Politics, Mr. Secretary. Nice of you to be with us. The passage of an infrastructure bill carries the promise of a lot of jobs, but of course people want examples of projected numbers and what kind of jobs. What can you tell us?
Well, I think that there's two tracks, two ways bills are moving through here. One is a bipartisan infrastructure bill, which is a bill in infrastructure investments in roads and bridges, in broadband access, clean, replacing lead pipes, electric grid. Those are physical construction jobs that there's going to be opportunities to move forward, and those obviously will generate other spin-off jobs from it. And then on the CARES economy, the Build Back Better side, the human infrastructure, there's going to be money in job training and apprenticeship programs. And those really are going to be up to really us and this country to dictate how do we create opportunities and pathways for people to get into those jobs. Money in there for the CARES economy, both in childcare, but also in adult care and elder care. And those are jobs that already exist. Those are jobs predominantly held by women and people of color, and that a lot of times are underpaid. So there's opportunities to increase the opportunities for making good wages in those industries.
Any examples that apply to California?
There's probably a lot. I don't want to start spending money in California because I'll get in trouble. I'll have all the mayors mad at me and the governor upset with me. But when you think about, infrastructure as far as, I'll give you an example. Los Angeles is doing a major infrastructure investment in rail, which is one of the biggest in the country, if not the biggest in the country. The investments in the infrastructure bill are able to going to be made into $67 billion that's going to go into commuter rail, into Amtrak, and then other investments in rail as well. So you have opportunities to grow and maybe make better connections between cities and parts of the state that might not be fully connected other than by highway right now.
Job growth has been good, although we are still hearing some employers having a lot of trouble getting workers. Is that a problem that's getting better?
I believe that's getting better. I haven't heard much other than reports on on the news, employers have not notified me and said, I haven't heard a lot saying that in the last month or so, we're not getting workers. Certainly workers are coming back at a good clip. We added 850,000 jobs last month. It was the single largest, I believe, job increase in the history of the country. In the last 5 months, we've brought 3.1 million jobs back to the economy. The biggest areas has been tourism and hospitality. I'm hopeful to see those gains continue. Certainly, we're seeing the traffic come back, so more and more people are coming back to work. And as we reopen the economy, we will start seeing more people go back to work. The one thing I just want to add there, a little asterisk, is to make sure that people do get vaccinated. That's the one area that certainly we have concerns. Still, there's a good percentage of this country that's not vaccinated yet. So we want to get people vaccinated so we can reopen safely.
Some Democrats in Congress, especially the House, they say physical infrastructure, things like roads and bridges, should not be separate from social infrastructure. Things like childcare, even climate change. Can those two initiatives be separated?
Well, they are being separated right now, and we're moving both forward. I think that, it's something that I've spent a lot of time in the last 3 months advocating on behalf of both the physical infrastructure and the human infrastructure. And I think that, in the last few weeks, we've had some very good conversations with members of the Congress and members of the Senate as we move forward here. So, I'm pretty hopeful that we're going to see a two-bill track system moving forward.
Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me today.
And you can see more of our interviews online. Just head to your local station's website and click on Inside California Politics. Thanks for watching Inside California Politics. We'll see you back here next weekend.